finally got your book. I finally found it on Amazon for not $1 million.
How much you pay?
$90.
That's a great
It
price.
was a great price.
Yeah.
Yes. And worth every penny. So yeah, it was over 200 for a while when we looked. Mike's working on getting that back out there, but it's one of the most informative books on live foods. It's the most informative book on live foods. One of the most informative fish books I've ever read. So Mike is also our go-to. The second that I learned that a speaker is not able to come, Andre was going to speak tonight on plants, but he got called away to the Mayo Clinic. So I'm insulted that he ran off somewhere named after a condiment, but some important issues. He'll speak to us in January now on plants. And so Mike sent me his list of talks, and I have to admit I'm a little bit selfish. That's why you've seen the live feeds talk and the bed talk. And I saw that he was going to cover some of his cats in this. And this Steve, that's something I'm always asking about. He was just sharing a video of Grandiops, and I was Grandiops responding for him. So I'm hoping that Mike will teach me tonight about breeding upside down cats. I already told him that, so hopefully. And then the elusive glass cats. But he says that's not something that's happened yet. Maybe me. Maybe
You never know.
Anyway, I'll stop talking and turn it over to the star of the show. Greatly appreciate Mike stepping in. Mike, by the way, is one of the, if you don't know this, not just for our club, but one of the top speakers across the country. It's in high demand. We're just incredibly fortunate to have him in the club. So please give Mike a big round of applause.
Well, thank you, Steve. Now I got to live up to that. So, I'm not sure where to put this. All right. Am I getting feedback?
Nope.
Yep, there it is. I can hear it. Let's try. How about that?
Seems good.
Can you guys in the back hear? All right. Okay. So, as Steve mentioned, I'm a pinch hitter tonight. I was going to try to put in a picture of a red catfish, just in honor of Andre. The only pictures I could find, though, were pictures of cories that were supposed to be the new super orange cories that were bright red, but they were very obviously doctored, so I just decided not to put anything in there. And I'll just mention that I'll be looking forward to Andre's talk, too. So hopefully I don't put everybody to sleep tonight. If I do, I'll get my photo credits out of the way at the beginning. I always like to thank everybody who helps me out with pictures. Most of the pictures in here are mine. You'll be able to tell very easily which ones are mine and which ones are done by the pros like Gary Lang. And we've also got some from Charlie Grimes, who does a lot of great photos too. Diane Brown, who was a member of our club. Charles Harrison, who I was going to give some trouble to tonight too, but he's not here. I guess the weather kind of kept him away. And then there are a few that I have borrowed from the internet. I always ask on the website, I always ask permission to use the photo. When they do answer, they do usually say yes and ask for credit, so I always give credit. But a lot of times they don't answer, so I assume that also means yes. So I know this is going out on the internet now, so if anybody sees your picture, oh, and I got to say hi to Kevin Plazek too, if he's watching. So first of all, Siluriformian, what the heck does that mean? Well, that means of or pertaining to catfish, basically. And I've heard it used basically in reference with larger catfish. Of course, most of us don't keep larger catfish. Some of us have experience with them in the rivers doing some fishing. But basically, that's what we're going to talk about. And then serendipity is another word that kind of throws people for a loop sometimes. Oxford Dictionary defines it as a occurrence or development of events by chance in a happy or beneficial way. In other words, a happy accident. So basically what this talk is going to be is how to take advantage of luck and try to create the conditions for the catfish to do what comes naturally with them. So we're gonna see how many people come up with questions and stuff like that. So basically, there are 38 families of catfish. This changes a little bit. A couple of them get combined and separated every once in a while. But when you talk about the BAP, about 3% of the BAP entries are from just 4 families of catfish out of that 38. So you got the Corridoridae, you got the Loricaridae, You got the Macochidae, the Synodontis catfish, and you've got the Agamyxis, which are the woodcats. And that's a little bit smaller, actually a much smaller number of people that are working with those. But all of these are bred in the hobby fairly frequently. But how do you find out about that? You can go online. I did a little looking online today because I always like to criticize the internet. And the internet didn't let me down. Google's AI started telling me all this stuff that I knew was wrong. But it's the stuff that's regurgitated out there over and over again. So if you want to go to a place that's got good information, you can go to scottcat.com or you can go to Planet Catfish. And those are the two sites. And then there's also another one in England called Seriously Fish. And those have a lot of really good information. Once you get away from them, a lot of the stuff that I found out there when I was looking today, as I was expecting, was just the same thing over and over and over again that the websites were repeating and that the AI was repeating. So the AI doesn't really know a whole lot. But these things here, this is basically the internet before the internet existed. There are some of these going back, I've got a couple of books back when Abraham Lincoln was president. And the information in there is still good. And there's a lot of information that's in those books and the magazines too that isn't available on the internet. Steve asked me a question tonight. He's asking about the upside down catfish. One of the first old TFH magazines I found, I think it was 1957 or 58, I opened it up and started looking at in the magazine, and there was an article from the Steinhardt Aquarium about breeding the upside down catfish. And you go out there now and there's all kinds of stuff about, well, they may do this or they may do that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But it's not from people who've actually bred the fish. So it's just people regurgitating what other people have said, which is just regurgitated from what other people said, so which is what the AI is telling them, I guess, now. But anyway, I've got about 700 books or so. There's a stack on the floor, too. But basically, you can't see it. This goes over here a lot further. This is another rack, that's magazines. But this whole section from about here over to here, and then all down here, those are all books about catfish. And there's a lot of information in there that's just not out there on the internet. So if you ever get a chance to buy books, just think of it as the old internet, and go ahead and pick them up. You can usually get them pretty cheap. And if you want to learn about catfish, these three books here have a lot of great information. This one's kind of interesting. Kathy Jenkins, a lot of people have kind of poo-pooed some of the stuff that she said, but she's got a lot of good information in there too. The Bench Catfish Atlas, which is one of those books that's about this thick, and then the Freshwater Marine Catfish Atlas, which again is another book that's about that thick. And then the Modes of Reproduction in Fishes, I use that all the time. That book was written back in the late 50s. And basically, the scientists went out, Breder and Rosen, the two guys that wrote that, and they went together and gathered all of the spawning reports from fishermen and from scientists and from hobbyists, and just kind of every family of fish, they have what is known at that time about breeding fish or about breeding those fish. So there's a lot of great information that's in there that's just not out there. And then a lot of fish, there is no information out there at all. We are fortunate that a lot of times stuff comes in all that is new to us, doesn't have a scientific name, and then where's Mike? He makes up the names. There you are. Okay, I couldn't see you with the.
Makes them up for me.
But people make up the trade names for them and stuff like that. But when you get them, you got to figure out what to do with them. So what I have is a series of 2 foot by 2 foot by 1 foot deep tanks. And I've got them basically with a big pile of Java moss, big piece of driftwood in the back that's got some anubias on it. There's another dish back here that's got a real fine sand in it. There's rocks up here that have big and smaller pieces, so there's all kinds of little caves. I've got some coconut caves and stuff in there, and just little piles of rocks and stuff all around, and piles of driftwood. And then not expensive plants, sorry, Andre. But these are all the cheap, easy to grow plants and stuff like that. And then the other thing that I do with these tanks, you can see this one was just set up recently. The bottom's nice and clean. But when you come and look in my fish room, a lot of the tanks are not super clean. I change the water all the time, but I don't clean the tanks a whole lot. I do clean the glass sometimes, especially when I know people are coming over, but just the front glass. And the rest of the time, the fish are really happy, and most of the tanks I have baby fish in there because the baby fish can find places to hide and everything like that all throughout there. So I do this for all the fish, but for the catfish as well, when I don't know what to do, and then kind of see where they choose to hang out, and then I can set up their tank according to that. And then the first thing to play around with, obviously, is the water parameters. We've got fairly decent water here in St. Louis, depending on where you live. If you live like way down south, and you're getting it from the Merrimack River, it's not quite as great. But the water that's coming from the Mississippi and the Missouri River, Kurt, thank you for that, wherever you are. We're getting, there you are. Thank you for that, getting good quality water. And most fish are fairly adaptable, and most freshwater fish anyway are fairly adaptable. And we can start with our own tap water. And then you start playing with things like pH and hardness, moving them up, moving them down, changing them a couple of points this way and that way if the fish don't start responding, or if you're trying to trigger them to spawn. Extending the time between water changes. Kind of what you're doing is you're going to simulate what happens in the dry season, where the water kind of goes down. I've known a lot of hobbyists who let the water evaporate like halfway in the tank, and just don't do any water changes, barely feed the fish, and then all of a sudden start doing lots of water changes, add cooler water, do water changes every day, start filling it up, start feeding them real heavily with live foods and stuff like that to simulate what happens when the rainy season comes. And a lot of times that'll trigger especially catfish to get going. And then the other thing is, especially with catfish, add more aeration. I can tell you that I've had a lot of luck with some of the quarries. I don't know, Jerry does it probably a little differently because he's got so many quarries. But what I do is I'll put 5 or 6 air stones in there on a night like this where the storm front's basically going through. The barometric pressure has changed a lot. My knee is killing me because the barometric pressure is changing. And I'll do a water change, a big water change with a little bit cooler water, and add all those air stones to the water. And usually that'll trigger the fish to spawn. Especially quarries and stuff like that. And then the other thing is I get people asking me questions all the time. Well, how do you do this? How do you do that? How do you do this? And I'll tell them, and then I'll see them a couple weeks later and say, hey, did that work for you? Well, I didn't do that. What else should I try? I was like, well, wait a minute, go back and try that first and see what happens, and then try something else. But don't be afraid to experiment. Kind of take notes, remember what you did, and just change one thing at a time, but kind of go through there and change things and see what happens. And a lot of times it's just changing that one thing, like maybe dropping the temperature or raising the temperature or something like that. Temperature is another thing that's really important, especially with catfish. You can drop the temperature or you can warm it up a little bit. I've got the cories here. This Corydoras palliatus longfin. With these guys, you cool it down a little bit. With some of the Asian catfish, you actually want to warm it up about 5 or 6 degrees. So a little bit of a change in the opposite direction. No, those are, darn it, gold lasers. So, and then the other thing that I do, if that doesn't work, I'll take the heater and I'll put the heater on a timer. And it'll run for about 8 hours, warm up the tank a little bit, and then let it cool down. And then it'll warm up the tank again the next day, the same thing. Maybe when I'll time it so that when the sun's out, so that basically there's a regular cycle of going up and going down. Kind of the same thing that happens in a lake or something like that. And a lot of times that works really well as a trigger. And then, like I said, weather changes work really, really well for catfish. Corydoras are very famous for doing that. I have found that I had this group of Agamyxis thoricata, the Hoplo catfish, that would just go from laying on the bottom all day. A storm front had come through, I'd do a water change, and this is the male right here, one of the males, this is another male here. But you can see this is his genital papilla. And basically, he would get all excited and within a couple hours have this huge nest built on top of the tank. And he and this other guy would be fighting, and the female would be kind of poking her head in and was like, come on, guys, what are you doing? And I'll show you in a few minutes what happens with those guys. And another thing that you can play around with is lighting, especially with catfish. A lot of them spawn at night. And now, especially with LED lighting, we can simulate like a really low blue light, like moonlight. And adding that so that it simulates the full moon, a lot of times that works as a trigger as well when you do some of these other things. And then another thing that a friend of mine has done to spawn some of the knife fish and also some of the really weird catfish is he uses a strobe light. And we'll talk about something else he does in a minute, but he uses a strobe light to simulate lightning. So the storms are coming as he's doing his water changes. He's got a sprinkler thing that's rigged up so it's like rainfall in the tank. And it gets a little crazier because sound comes into play too. Fishermen will tell you that fish can hear. Jacques Cousteau talked about the silent world all the time, and he even wrote a book called The Silent World. And I think he did one of his TV specials called The Silent World too, talking about the underwater world. The truth is, the fish make a lot of noise. And some scientists are able to tell different species just by putting a hydrophone in the water and listening. They can tell you what species are in the water right there because they make all kinds of fun noises. We have a group of catfish we call the talking catfish, the doradid catfish. And especially this one here, Amblydoris hancockii, is known as the talking catfish because you take them out of the water and they croak and they squeak and stuff like that. But they also do that in the water when they're interacting with one another. And a lot of the other catfish make sounds too. They actually can move their pectoral fins, and that makes a grinding sound. They have a bone in there that they can rub them against. They also have something called the web-bearing apparatus, which is a connection between a couple of their internal organs that magnifies sound. And a lot of times you can get catfish to make all kinds of squeaking and croaking sounds if you listen. But a lot of times you got the filter running, you got your aerator going in there that's bubbling real loud and everything. Sometimes the fish can't hear each other. So if you use air stones instead of using that real fast churning, the catfish can hear each other a lot better. So that helps a lot too. And then, like my friend with the strobe light also does this. He has a recording that plays all kinds of storm sounds and everything like that. You go into his fish room and there's lightning going and it's really kind of humid in there, and he's playing this recording of rainfall and jungle sounds and sounds like birds and frogs and all that kind of stuff. It's actually kind of cool, but I guess it's okay. He's a single guy, so he can do that. But anyway, sound is important, and you got to think about that sometimes, especially with things like catfish. And then another thing people don't really realize with catfish, you always think about, well, they use their barbels. They have taste buds all over their barbels. Well, they also can not only smell, but they can touch and taste, and they can pick up all kinds of sensations with their barbels. And a lot of them also have taste buds on their pelvic fins and their pectoral fins, and some of them even have taste buds on their bodies. So that, a lot of catfish, when you stop and think about it, they have really tiny eyes. So they don't use their eyes very much. They're also active at night, so they can't really see that well. They don't need to see that well, but they still need to be able to find each other, find food and everything like that. So they have all these other senses that they use. And if you're trying to breed them, you need to allow the male and female to be able to smell each other. So what does that mean? Well, that means you don't want to be taking, a lot of the fish will put the males will put pheromones into the water. And if you've got carbon in your filter, a lot of times it's pulling them out. So you don't want to use carbon in a breeding tank because you might be pulling some of those necessary pheromones out. And some of them, if they get this pheromone in the water, it triggers the female to respond to the male and to ovulate. And if she doesn't get that pheromone trigger, she won't spawn. So can be very, very important. So something to keep in the back of your mind. And then another thing is, Eric Bodrock taught me this one. If you're having trouble with something that's kind of rare and unusual and difficult to spawn, and they're not spawning, and you have something else that's kind of closely related to them that is real easy, real common. And the example here would be like bronze cories or Paleatus cories that spawn all the time. And you got some real weird L749 or C749 or something like that that has never been bred before. You take the water from the tank where the bronze cories are spawning. You take a couple pitchers of water and you pour that into the tank. So you're adding those pheromones to the tank of the one that you're trying to breed. And a lot of times that'll trigger the response and get things going. And I'll show you a little bit more about that in just a minute. Oh, I'll show it to you right now. Okay. This is a group of Corydorus, I think, was it Schultzi? Yeah. This is a spawning frenzy. And you can see there are about 25 fish in here. These are all males. The females are actually sitting over here on the bottom, and they're just kind of waiting to see what happens. And this is almost like a race. The males just start chasing each other. They're kind of butting heads. With some of the species of cories, you'll see blood. Some of them will get a bloody mouth. They'll get a bloody pectoral fin. Some of them will lock pectoral fins together and kind of fight and everything like that. And what they're doing is kind of, it's almost like when you see two male deer, where they're doing the rut and they're kind of banging heads. These guys are kind of doing the same thing. And it gets their blood up, it gets the pheromones or get the hormones going, and then at a certain point, one of them will kind of be the one that's on top. And out of this whole group of cories, only one male will do the spawning. And oddly enough, he will spawn with only one female. And usually those two will lay all the eggs, and all the other fish just kind of, you might see another male that's almost as dominant go off with another female and spawn, but usually you only get that one male and one female that spawn out of that whole group. And that's kind of what happens in the wild too. So that kind of gives you an idea of why it's better and why some people don't have a lot of success, because a lot of the catfish are kind of expensive, and people only keep one or two catfish. They might buy a male and a female. And sometimes the males need that competition banging heads in order to get their hormones going and get them excited and get them ready to go. And then there's conditioning. This is Gary's picture of a real thin catfish. That's actually pretty common for a lot of the catfish. What you want to do is you want to separate them by sexes. So you'll take the males and put them in one tank, the females and put them in another tank for about a week or so. Feed them real heavily. Live foods like worms, grindle worms and white worms work really well. Black worms, if we can ever start getting them again, work really well as well. But you want to see the females start filling up like this. The males don't get as heavy, so it makes it real easy to sex them, even some of the ones that are a little bit more challenging to figure out which are boys and which are girls. But this is a great example of what a female catfish should look like before you try to put them together to spawn. And then another thing I always talk about, and again, Andre's not here, so I'll mention plants. Okay, use live plants. They help kind of condition the water a little bit. They add natural sensations to the water, tastes and smells, and of course the catfish are picking up on all that. They also help provide shelter and territories. The other thing about live plants is that they're constantly changing. They're growing, they're dying, things are changing. So what might not be a perfect habitat this week, in a couple of weeks there might be the perfect leaf in the perfect place that gets the catfish to go. So they're constantly changing. And they also, for a lot of species, and a couple we'll talk about here in a few minutes, they provide a safe place for the fry and the eggs, and sometimes just for the fish to spawn out of the way of the other fish in the tank. And then they're also covered with microscopic life. And you'll see the fish kind of picking at them all day long. And there's all kinds of great food on them. So it's also like a between-the-meal snack for a lot of the, especially smaller fish. And then something that may seem important, or actually is very important, but it may seem like it's yeah, of course, you obviously have to have a pair. But a lot of times, people don't realize they don't have a pair. They're trying with 2 males or 2 females, and nothing's going to happen. This is my pair of, or one of my pairs of banjo cats. And you can see the differences in the male. Again, you can see the male's got a smaller belly, the female's got a larger belly. But a couple of the other things to notice, the males have this little extension and curve on the pelvic fins, or on the pectoral fins, and the pelvic fins are more triangular, whereas on the female, they're more paddle-shaped. So a couple of different things to look for. And a lot of times the males will also have, depending on the species, they'll also have little growths on the head and sometimes on the back of the body that you can feel, even if you can't quite see it. It feels like wet Velcro. So depending on the species. But just to give you an idea, you do have to have a pair. And then catfish, you have to have patience. A lot of us are used to going to the store, going to a club auction or something like that. You buy a pair of fish and you take it home. And if you don't breed it in a couple of days, all right, I'm done with that. Let's try something else. Banjo cats. I started with them. I got a group of young ones about that big, and I put them in a 30-gallon breeder tank with a layer of Java moss on the bottom and over a layer of sand and a couple of big sponge filters in there. And I fed the tank and I did water changes, and I pretty much forgot about them for almost 10 years. So people would come over and they were like, what's in that tank? What's in that tank? What is that? And every once in a while, you'd see one of the males come out and he'd kind of clear out an area, all this detritus built up in there. And people were thinking, no, you poor catfish, they got to live in that. Well, when I finally went to take this tank down and move it, I had pulled out, I put in 8 fish, I think, originally. I pulled out 4 dead fish over the years that were full-grown adults. So there should have been 4 fish in there, right? So these guys, the best way to catch them is with your hands. Just kind of feel around in the Java moss and the muck and everything like that.
Just don't grab them by the tail.
Well, yeah, if you grab them by the tail, they flip around a lot. But
Turn into a pickaxe on your hand.
yeah, well, they can, yeah. But if you hold them like I was holding in the picture there, where they're kind of like just laying on your hand, then it's pretty easy to maneuver them around. They do this, though. This wasn't something that I did for the pictures. They actually do. They kind of roll over and curl up in your hand a little bit. But I started removing them, and I started removing some smaller ones, and it was like, I knew they got bigger than that. I knew they were all bigger than that. So I pulled a few little ones out of there, and it was like, well, wait a minute. That's 8, 9, 10. And I hadn't even started pulling any big ones out yet. And then I found the big ones, and there were still the 4 big ones in there. And I wound up with, I don't even remember how many, it was about a dozen or so, smaller ones of a couple of different sizes. So they were obviously already a year or 2 years old, so they had spawned in there. And I talked to Lee Finley about that, who was a catfish guru of days gone by. And I mentioned it to him, and he said, there's an article about breeding those way back. And he told me where to find it, and I went back and found it. Found out that they eat rotifers. Well, where do you find rotifers? The sponge filters that were in there, they're covered with rotifers. And all of the Java moss that was in there, and all of this garbage that was in here is full of all kinds of stuff that the rotifers eat. So the food for the babies was there in the tank, and I guess you'd call it either serendipity or benign neglect. But anyway, but it took a long time. And a lot of the catfish are like that. A lot of them don't even get sexually mature until they're 5 to 10 years old. So just kind of keep that in mind. And if you worry about, well, those fish are 10 years old now, they're not going to breed. Well, I've had cories that I know were 24 years old, and they were still spawning. So catfish at least can keep going and going and going. So don't be a neat freak with catfish. And then always start with a group. A lot of times people buy a pair. Well, a lot of the catfish are a little bit more expensive. Some of the catfish are fairly aggressive with one another, so you got to give them all kinds of places to hide in a fairly big tank. But start with a group. Buy a dozen, 12 fish, 14 fish, something like that, and put them all together in the tank. You might find a couple that you have to remove because they're just getting too aggressive or they're getting beat up. But for the most part, it works really well, or a lot better to get fish to breed than starting out with just a pair. Sometimes you're just not going to have any luck. And again, I'll just bring up the Corey Schultz eye again, just to remind you. A lot of times the males just need that competition. So another thing I've found that works really, really well are these Matten filters. And I kind of plant Java moss and Java fern and Bucephalandras and all that kind of stuff. I get them growing on there. And you'd think that this makes it even worse for filtration, but it actually, if you can see this, there's not a lot of muck and dirt building up in there. And this particular Matten filter I had up for about 10 years in that tank, and I never once took it out to clean it. But behind it, there's a little open plenum or a little open space. And I'd always take a little hose and go back there and siphon out all the muck and stuff that built up in there. And one day, I had a problem, I think, with the drain, so I wasn't doing what I usually do, which is I've got a drain line that goes around the fish room. I was just draining it right into that drain line and go down the floor drain. But this time I drained it into a bucket. And I looked in the bucket and it was like, oh, there's some blackworms in there. They weren't blackworms, they were baby coolie loaches. All of a sudden, I started looking behind all the Matten filters, and I don't know how they get back there, but I find baby fish of all kinds, including catfish and loaches and stuff like that, behind the Matten filters. So that's another thing to kind of keep in the back of your mind. And the Matten filters are just completely covered, again, with all kinds of rotifers and ciliates and stuff like that. So great live foods. And then these aren't catfish, they're loaches, but just to give you an idea. And then another thing is leaf litter. Use leaf litter in the tank, just a big pile of it. It's kind of like what the fish find in the wild. And set it up so that you got a several inch thick pile. You can see there's sand on the bottom, and then a bunch of sticks and twigs and stuff like that. And that gives the catfish places to hide. As this breaks down, it's also covered with all kinds of fungi and bacteria and stuff like that. So it's a lot of stuff that baby fish can eat. And a lot of times with the catfish, all you're trying to do is set them up so that you can get a serendipitous spawn out of them. And you wind up, a lot of times you won't know that anything has happened until all of a sudden there's a baby fish in there just swimming around with the adults. So, and that happens all the time. So just kind of think about stuff like that. And then if all else fails, the last thing is to move your fish to another tank, because I don't know how many times I've given away a pair of fish to somebody or a group of fish, and I've heard the next day or a couple days later, hey, they spawned for me. So, and I've done that to people too. They've said, hey, I've never been able to get this thing to spawn. Here, take the pair, and I'll take them home, and they'll spawn for me the next day.
was able to walk on clouds, but that didn't include birds.
Was ist los? You did that. Okay, Laura.
Me this time.
All right. But you'll see that a lot of times just moving them to a different tank in a different room, move them up, move them down, move them around somehow where they're exposed to natural light, where they're not exposed to natural light anymore. Just kind of change things around outside of the tank. If you have a cat or a dog and you got a tank that's down lower and the animal's going by it all the time, maybe move it up higher where they won't be bothered by that big set of eyes going along and licking and everything like that all the time, like my dog used to do. So, and this is one of my favorite little catfish. It's a little, from here to here, it's just over an inch long. So, but the cool thing about these guys is that I have no idea how they spawn. I think they're a scatterer, but I'm not entirely positive. But if you have a group of them in a 10-gallon tank with a big pile of plants in there, one day you'll see one of them this one's starting to, but they'll turn almost like an orange crayon, just that bright, bright orange. And I don't know if it's the male or the female. And you'll see them sitting up high in the plants. And about a week later, start looking around for little tadpoles swimming around because they look like itty-bitty little tadpoles swimming around on the bottom of the tank. And just feed the tank.
Is that a banjo-type catfish?
What's that?
Is that a banjo-type catfish?
No, this is actually from Southeast Asia. It's a little bagrid.
Kind of like a whiptail?
No.
So this is the right
Yeah, completely different part of the world. So
Something like a rock catfish.
they now call them sometimes stone catfish. Yeah,
Like Asian stone catfish.
yeah, Asian stone catfish. There's actually another in the same family that was called the stone catfish for a long time, and it was a bigger fish. But these are a lot smaller. These are literally only an inch long. So you got to feed them live foods, and other than that, no other fish in the tank, which kind of makes catfish tanks a little boring. What's that? No, something more along the lines of like grindle worms and microworms and stuff like that. And especially when you see fry in there, put microworms in there. What?
Scuds and like Rotifers, very careful.
I still can't hear you.
Like Moina and stuff like that.
No, they don't get up in the water and swim. They don't go after food. It's got to be down on the bottom. Yeah.
I say, would you say this is like a high flow stream type tank?
No,
Lots of gravel?
no, it's more like a lake or a small pond or something like that. So, and then if you do it all right, we used to have council meetings. I see a few of the old council members here when we used to go to each other's house every month, and we'd show off our tanks and stuff like that. And I had a 55-gallon tank with about a dozen big ones of these in there. And Reed Thomas, who was a member that some of you may remember, he's like, "Oh, you got bumblebee bumblebee gobies in here." And I said, "No, those are bumblebee catfish." And he said, "No, I'm talking about the little ones." And I said, "What do you mean? There aren't any little ones in there. They get to be about 3.5, 4 inches long." And he's like, "No, there's some little ones that are only about a half an inch long in here." And so I got down there and I started looking, and sure enough, every plant, I had the 55-gallon tank. It had like 4 or 5 big sword plants in there. And every one of the sword plants, down at the crown of the plant, there were 3 or 4 little baby catfish just kind of stuck down in there. And I have no idea how they spawned or what they did, but I gave them the right conditions and got them to spawn. So, and then I have the name, you usually see this name in there, herring eye. Most likely the fish that's in the hobby is not herring eye, it's something else that's undescribed. There are 6 or 7 species in this family, or in this genus. And we're probably, if you look at them, sometimes they look a little bit different. And the reason is because we're getting different species in at different times. So, but you'll always see them under that name. But if you can get a group of these guys and just keep them and feed them, and you'll see the females get real big and heavy. I mean, they just like that Tadia that I showed earlier with the big belly. Yes?
Are there any plans to have in-person council meetings anymore or no?
I don't know. Not for the next rest of the year at least. So, and we're kind of scattered out a lot further now too. So it makes it a lot harder for people.
It was nice going to those.
It was. It was a lot of fun getting together and getting to see everybody's fish room.
There is some talk about doing some fish room tours.
Yes, there is.
So.
We're green lit, actually, Carl. I just
Hmm?
need to-
Hey. The heritage of
The Asian stuff.
The Jordan eye?
They have it listed as a dwarf archer cat.
Yeah, anchor catfish. Yeah, yeah. Because if you look at them, they do kind of look like an anchor, like an old-fashioned anchor. So, another one that you'll see every once in a while. I've got a group of these right now. Microcynodontis species bumblebee. They're a hidden spawner. So again, nobody knows exactly what they do to spawn. Just every once in a while, a baby shows up in the tank. So, and it's just 1 or 2. It's not a whole bunch of them. But setting them up with the right conditions, no other fish in the tank, and giving them a lot of good foods and everything like that. And these guys, they will come out during the day if you put food in during the day. But as soon as they're done eating, they go back and they hide. So for the rest of the day, it's an empty tank. But if you're going to try to breed them, that's probably what you're going to have to do is sacrifice a couple of tanks. Then this guy, some of you may remember the fish breeding contest that I was in 2009 or something like that. Anyway, I had this guy. I tried to breed them. I had them set up in a 29-gallon tank. I had a group of about a dozen of them. Males, kind of long, triangular. Females, a little bit heavier bodied. And you can see the males have a little bit more triangular fins, and the females have a little bit rounder fins. They call these the Wasp catfish, and they have a little bit of a sting to them, so you want to be careful if you're handling them. They're really tiny, too. They're only about 1.5 inches long. There are several species in this genus. I don't know for sure that the species I had was Prashadi. I don't know for sure. But they spend all of their time, they're sand swimmers. You cannot even see the eyes. They're so tiny because they just basically don't use them. They literally swim through the sand. And what the male does is he kind of digs out a little nest under a piece of driftwood or a rock or something like that, and it coax the female over there, and she'll lay the eggs, they'll bury them in the sand, and then they kind of just let them go. Well, I had these guys set up for a couple of months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, and I was just wasting that tank because they weren't doing anything. I was just feeding the tank, so I needed to breed something else, move something else in there. So I moved some cichlids in there, and I took the catfish out. And cichlids spawned, little babies, little wigglers, you know, they were moving the fry around, and all the fry disappeared. Okay, well, let's do it again. They spawn again. Well, I can't waste this tank anymore because the same thing happened. So after about the third or fourth time, I was putting in some blackworms to feed the cichlids that were in there, and I saw the sand starting to move. And this little catfish popped out, about inch long or so. So I was giving him live foods all that time, raising them up, all these little baby cichlids. But just a neat little fish. But with that contest, I didn't really get to study them and watch them like I usually try to do. And unfortunately, I didn't get to see the spawning, so I lost a couple other spawns because of that. But a neat little fish. Woodcats. These guys are interesting because the males fertilize the female internally, and then she swims off, and like the Centromochus perugiae, she'll go into a cave, she'll lay her eggs in there, and then she'll tend the eggs, and then when they hatch, the cool thing about these guys is that they hide all the time, and you put food in there, and the tank explodes with life. And they come out, and they just eat real fast, and then they all disappear again. And if you see the female just sitting in her cave, you know, just looking at you and stuff like that, get the other fish out of the tank. Because what's going to happen after about 10 days or so is she's going to come out for the food. And when she comes out for the food, all those babies are going to come out, and all the other fish in the tank are going to go, food, and come down there and eat them all. So if you want to raise any of them, you need to, as soon as the female's ready to leave, you want to get her out of there too and raise the fry in that tank. These guys used to be really common. They called them the Zamara catfish. Now they call them the midnight catfish. They're not very big. They only get to be about 4 inches long. They swim around up in the water column all day long. They're like a schooling fish. The male will fertilize the female internally. If you see a female that's starting to fill up with eggs and you've got her in with males, go ahead and net her out, move her to another tank. She'll scatter her eggs in the plants, and then after she lays her eggs, she just ignores them and just put her back in the tank with the adults or with the other adults. And then fry are really easy to raise. You can raise them on baby brine shrimp, and they're just a cool little catfish, or medium-sized catfish, I guess. And these guys also like to eat a lot. And then there's another one that's been, it hasn't been around for a while, and then all of a sudden they just started showing up on the list again a few weeks ago. This is Tadia intermedia. It's called the Galaxy Woodcat, and they get these bright gold spots all over them. They get to be about 5-6 inches long. These guys lay their eggs in a big ball of jelly, and it almost looks like frog eggs or something like that. And again, this was one that I had a group of them in a tank, and another time we had a council meeting, and somebody said, well, why have you got those frog eggs in there? Aren't those catfish going to eat them? And it was like, whoa, there's no frog eggs in there. And go over there and look, and there's a couple of things about the size of tennis balls that are obviously just little things of eggs. So I moved a couple of them out of there and put them into a 2.5-gallon tank to hatch them out. And I left the adults in that tank, and they kept spawning. And apparently these eggs taste really bad because nobody ever touched them. It was just like that little ball of jelly just stayed there all the time. But the fry in the tank I never got any fry out of there because I assume as soon as they hatched, well, then it was like a feeding frenzy with the adults. But the other ones, I had in a 2.5 gallon tank, a bare tank, feeding them baby brine shrimp and microworms, and they're just growing and growing. I had a little hydrosponge filter in there. And then every day I noticed there were fewer in there and fewer in there and fewer in there. And what the heck's going on? All of a sudden, one day there was not a single one in that tank. A 2.5 gallon tank, where did they go? So I'm taking the tank down, I pulled the filter apart, I opened up the hydrosponge. The inside of the hydrosponge filter was full of little babies. They were just stacked in there like sardines. And they just exploded out of there all over the tank. So they like to start hiding when they're fairly young. You got to give them a place to go. But just a cool little catfish.
Where are those from?
These, they're South American. The Acanetbrids are found all over northern South America. So some of them get pretty big too. Some of them get about that size, but most of them stay about 5 or 6 inches. And then I already talked about the banjo cats, but just to give you an idea of what the females look like from the side. And then I mentioned the huplos earlier. Here's the males getting all excited after a rainstorm. And what they do is they build a bubble nest. And they don't blow it out of their mouth, they actually blow it out of their gills. So they'll swim up, and for whatever reason, they like the color yellow. So if you put a yellow coffee can lid in the tank, they'll come up there and they'll build their nest under there. And sometimes they'll build a nest that's so big that they literally lift the top of the tank up a little bit with the bubble nest. And then the female will go under there, she'll lay some eggs, then the male will go back under there and he'll fertilize them, and they'll go back and forth. And the male has this little genital papilla that he uses, he's kind of swinging it around like that as he's going up there and fertilizing the eggs. So I'm not sure if he's actually spreading the milt around with that, or if he's just making sure that everything gets covered with milt, or exactly how that's working. But I've watched him do it several times. Kind of a neat thing. Fry are real easy to raise. The males guard the nest, and you don't put your hands in the tank. You're warned. They will draw blood. So I have had them, I've tried to do a water change a couple of times, stuck my hand in there, didn't think he'd do anything, bam! So they've got teeth. And then this is a female here. You'll notice that the male's got the big, thick pectoral fins. Female has real small ones still. And then the male also has what Dr. Sally Boggs used to call a vest. Looks like he's wearing a little vest. These are the 2 plates of the I forget, coracoid or whatever, but the 2 plates. And then the female, she doesn't have them like this. Hers are widely separated. So, and Sally always said it looked like he was wearing a little vest. So, there you go, upside down catfish. These guys are real common in the hobby. Most of them are caught in the wild. They have been bred in the hobby several times. The interesting thing about these is depending on what website you're reading, and you can figure out pretty quickly where the information came from. They're a cave spawner, or they dig a pit. Well, I've had them lay eggs for me, and the male guards the eggs, the female lays the eggs on top of a cave, on the ceiling of the cave, and then the male guards them. But apparently the female likes to eat the eggs. And the females can get to be about twice the size of the males. So if she wants to get in there, a lot of times she can. So it's a good idea to remove the female if you see the male in the cave guarding eggs. I've never been able to raise them, but I have seen them spawn a couple of times. Now, I don't know if the ones that spawn in the pit are somebody just guessing, or if it's a different species, because some of the mocochids do spawn in a pit. They dig a little pit and lay their eggs in there. Then you've got the cuckoo spawners, that's Synodontis grandiops, which we usually call that what is it, Steve? Did I not? Multipunctatus, yeah. And it's actually grandiops, which means big eye. These guys actually will spawn. They'll wait until a pair of mouth-brooding cichlids are spawning and they're doing their thing. And while the cichlids are doing their thing and laying the eggs, the catfish will swoop in real quick. They'll eat the egg that the cichlid laid and lay their own egg, and then the female cichlid will pick it up and raise the baby catfish in her mouth instead of the baby cichlids. And if she does have any cichlids in there, the catfish will hatch first, and they will eat the baby cichlids before they come out, or they'll eat the eggs if they haven't hatched yet. And then there's a couple others in the hobby, Synodontis petricola, which gets to be about 5 inches long, and then Synodontis lucipinus, which is 3.5 to 4 inches long. These guys are cave spawners, and the easiest way to spawn them is to put a flower pot with marbles in it, and then put another flower pot on top of it and notch a little hole out of it, and they'll go inside of there. And you actually know they're spawning because you'll hear the marbles moving around in there. They just get in there and they lay their eggs every day. And the first time I spawned these guys, I actually didn't know that they had spawned, and I started finding dead baby catfish that were about 1/2 inch long out in the tank. And what was happening was the adults just kept going in and spawning every day. And the fry would hatch, and then they'd start getting big and trying to get out, and they'd get crushed with the marbles. So if you start hearing that noise in there, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and take the adults out of that tank and move them to another tank, or move the little cave and set up another one.
Similar setup for that, where they have the flower pot,
Mm-hmm.
but instead of marbles in there, they put like a mesh over the top of
Mm-hmm.
it, and then another pot on top of
Yeah.
that. And they have a glass pot on the bottom that you can see through, so
Yeah.
you know that there's eggs in there.
Yeah, and there's also David Banks, a friend of mine from up in Vermont, rigged up a little thing where he put if you remember those old Tetra sponge filters that had the little neck on them, he actually rigged one of those up at the bottom of the pot, so it came up and it dumped into a net, and then it would suck the eggs out every day and dump them into the net, and he'd just pull them out of the net and move them to another tank. So there's all different kinds of ways. I'm sure if you go on the internet and start looking around, you'll find all different kinds of,
Spawning setup.
yeah, they all work equally well. So it just depends on what you have. And then these guys are awesome little guys. They have been spawned in the hobby, but nobody knows quite what's going on. I've had babies show up in the tank, keep about a dozen of them together. These guys are only about 1.5 inches long. This is a male here, and this is a female here. You can see she's a little bit yellow. And if you look back here, she's starting to get a little bit of a kind of yellowish green color. Those are the eggs. And I would find her, a couple of the females all big and fat, and then another day later, I wouldn't see the males, but the females would all be out there eating again, and they were skinny. I had no idea what was going on. I did hear from another hobbyist who said, oh, males actually lay their eggs on the surface of a leaf. That's why they're kind of greenish color, because they kind of blend in with the leaf. Then the male will sit up on top of them and kind of guard them for a couple of days until they hatch. So I don't know if that's true or not, but that's somebody else who's had luck breeding them as well, and also only had a few turn up at a time. So, but this is another one of those. It's a small catfish. It's fairly available. They're not very expensive. So why not set up a 20 long with 15 or 20 of them and see what happens? And you never know. And then if you like big and ugly, there are the Chaka catfish. This is Chaka bancaensis, which I was lucky enough to get several years ago from Ted Judy. I got a nice pair of them, and fortunately they were a really nice pair. They got along, and male and female stayed in the same catfish or in the same cave. They spawn, they lay their eggs in the cave, and the male then kicks the female out and guards the eggs. Unfortunately, my male and female, after about 6 months of harmony, suddenly they were not harmonious anymore. And the female stayed in the cave and kicked the male out. So, and then after that, I never was able to get them back together. But very cool fish. Very, very ugly, very interesting. Gets to be about 10 or so inches long. Just something completely different. And then this is another one you see in the hobby all the time, Agamyxis pectinifrons. This is one of the doradid catfish. These guys you'll see in the hobby, a lot of people buy them. They buy them singly. They keep one in a tank, and they're kind of like an Easter egg. You put them in the tank, and then you may not see them for 6 months or a year or a couple of years. You completely forget about them, and you put this little catfish in there, and you're doing a water change one day, or you're pulling some decorations out, and you hear this croaking sound, and you look in there, and there's this catfish about that big that's in there looking back at you going, hey, put me back in the water. But everybody keeps only one of them. If you keep a group of these guys are a surface spawner. They actually build, the males build a nest up in the floating plants. And they are, I don't know how easy they are to spawn actually, because I haven't spawned them yet, but they are fish that they will live for 15 or 20 years. So they may be fish that need to be 5 or 6 years old before they spawn for the first time. So, and then everybody's favorite, the iridescent shark. The only reason I have this in there is because this is not a fish for an aquarium. These guys literally get to be almost 4 feet long. You know, down at the Lake of the Ozarks, where you can go down at Bagnell Dam there, and you go to the restaurant, and there's the big deck that goes out there, and you got the little thing, and you can feed the carp that are out in the river, or in the water, and they all come up to eat and everything like that. Well, where these guys come from, they do the same thing, but they do it with the Pangasius catfish. These are also, they are delicious, by the way. You can get these at Schnucks. But anyway, I had a customer that some of you may remember, Jim Amsden, who owned Arnold Pet Palace. He used to do a lot of servicing of tanks, and when he sold this pet shop, he asked me to take over his service accounts. So he had one guy that was real excited, told me he had sharks. And he had a 150-gallon tank built into the counter of his store, and he come and see the sharks, come and feed the sharks. That was the big thing. So I figured he had a couple of lemon sharks or little saltwater fish. So I get there, and it's a freshwater tank. He's got a bunch of these in there. He had a dozen of these in a 150-gallon tank, and all of them were about that big. And the tank was so green that you couldn't see what else was in there. There were a bunch of other fish in there. So I was like, well, those aren't sharks. Those are catfish. They get way too big for that tank. They need to go somewhere else. And he's like, no, those are sharks. You're wrong. The guy sold me those as sharks. They're sharks. And I said, well, no, they're catfish. Well, I said, okay, well, I'll clean the tank up for you, get it all so you can see everything. Got the tank all cleaned up, got it all, put another filter on there. I talked him at least into adding a second filter. Next day, I get this phone call, really nasty phone call, that he is just beyond upset. The tank is all cloudy, and it smells funny, and there's something wrong with it. And I was like, okay, well, I'll be right down there. So I go down there, and the tank was milky white. And I go in, and I start removing the filter parts to see what's going on. And there's a mass of eggs covering up the intakes for the filters. These guys spawned when they got the nice big water change and everything was nice and clean and everything like that. They were only about 15, 16 inches long, so they were still fairly young. They were stunted. But I kept trying to convince this guy, you got to get rid of these fish. They're going to keep, well, how do you stop them from doing that? You get rid of the fish. They're going to keep doing that. This is normal. And it happened one more time, and he said, all right, come get rid of the fish. So I had to find somebody to take the fish. But anyway, these guys, the reason that they're available is because they kind of look cool when they're little, and they are very active. They swim around in the tank. But as they get bigger, you'll see them, especially if they're in small tanks, you'll see the males or the adults get their nose all banged up because they're very skittish. They'll dart into the glass in the tank and stuff. They don't belong in an aquarium, so please don't keep them, and please, whatever you do, don't breed them. So, but anyway, just to kind of wrap it up, thank you very much. So. Oh yeah, I forgot about this. People may wonder what I'm doing with this up here. Catfish are covered with spines. They are not easy to catch, especially with a net. Well, actually, they're pretty easy to catch with a net, but once you catch them in the net, it's very hard to extricate them from the net. Even little Otocinclus, they've got a series of little bumps on their nose that will get caught in the net. So Jim Graham gave me this. several years ago, and it has a little hole up here, so when you put it in the water, the air comes out, and it actually works really well for catching catfish. I've used little catch cups, and kind of corralled them into that, but don't use a net with trying to catch, especially some of the bigger catfish. So these things work. Used to be able to get them. I don't know if you can still get them or not. You can see this used to be green plastic. It's kind of faded over the years. So. But anyway.
I'm sure you could find a glass one.
Yeah. Well, actually, they used to make these. They used to make these out of glass back in the 50s, and government shut them down. They couldn't make them anymore. So, anyway, thank you very much. And if anybody has any questions, comments, anybody still awake? Okay. Thank you.
Mike, what
Yes.
would you say, like, one of those catfish that you like for a community catfish that stays out a little more?
I really like some of the like the Zamrock Coaches. I really like them.
Yeah,
They're a little bit bigger. They're a lot more active.
yeah. Get to see them more, they're not hiding.
Yeah,
as much.
yeah, they're out all the time.
I know the guys at Arnold are always getting questions on, like, what's a catfish that, that's not a quarry that
Yeah.
does something,
Yeah, unfortunately, most of them they're nocturnal fish, so you
Yeah.
just
Not gonna see them much.
no. There was a guy named Lee Finley that I mentioned, this catfish guy. He actually would use a red light over the top of the tanks, and he kept the room dark, and all day long his catfish would be out. So
Is that who did so I play animal noises
yeah,
and water sounds
okay,
in my fish room, and I have a rain system
okay.
over my turtle tanks. Who was your friend that did that?
His name is Hans, and he's in the Netherlands, and he is trying to sell his article about how he bred them,
Yeah.
and he doesn't want me telling anybody who he is until he gets that article sold.
Okay.